Hello and welcome to PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale History, where today we'll be taking a look at Colonel Radec, representative for FPS franchise Killzone. Following the success of Halo over on the Xbox, Sony realised that they could do with their own flagship first-person shooter for the PS2 due to the rising success of the genre on consoles. Enter Guerrilla Games, a Dutch developer who were working on a sci-fi shooter called Killzone, set in the war between rival human factions in space. Sony snapped up the game, marketed it as a Halo killer, and it did reasonably well. It was set in the far future where the outbreak of World War III resulted in a massive loss of life and the destruction of Earth's resources. Fleeing Earth, humanity settled on two planets in the Alpha Centauri system: Vector, a planet similar to Earth, and Helghan, a harsh planet full of resources able to provide power back on Vector. However, over time, conflicts began to appear between the people of Vector and the Helghast, the residents of Helghan that had mutated and adapted to the planet's harsh environment. Soon, war erupted, and so the series began. The first Killzone was set during an invasion attempt by the Helghast on Vector, and the player took control of ISA soldiers recruited to stop them. It was a moderate success to the point where it spawned sequels on the PS3. In Killzone 2, the ISA fought back, travelling to Helghan to retaliate. During much of this game, the ISA fought off troops led by a prominent Helghast colonel named Radec. Radec was a vicious, cruel man with a love of battle and bloodshed. He felt no remorse or compassion, and only wished to see his opponents wiped out. Equipped with a variety of weapons and cloaking device that allowed him to sneak around undetected, Radec was a formidable force in the Helghast army, and it was up to the player to stop him. Wait, he wasn't the player character, you say? That's correct. In fact, Radec was the final boss of Killzone 2 instead. So why exactly was he chosen for PlayStation All-Stars? Well, Killzone needed representation due to how successful it was for Sony, but the playable characters are barely seen on any promotional material. Instead, the iconic image for the franchise is the villainous Helghast army instead, with their gas masks and helmets providing a very striking image. Radec is one of the few named Helghast soldiers equipped with the gas mask to appear in the series. This made him more recognisably from Killzone than the ISA protagonists, and his status as a major villain of the series puts him in a strong position to represent the Helghast as a whole. But this obviously creates a dilemma. If Radec wasn't playable, how on earth did he get a moveset? Well, that's what we're here to find out. So let's start with the basics of Radec, shall we? Colonel Major Radec was mostly seen in Killzone 2 through cutscenes and in the final battle where you faced him directly. As a high-ranking Helghast, Radec was capable of more than just shooting at you like the general troops would. Throughout the game, he was depicted carrying a handgun and a combat knife, and during the boss fight, he would have a tendency of trying to knife you in the back. Oh, and he could also teleport. Radec was equipped with an unexplained device that allowed him to cloak and teleport around. At times it seemed like it was just a cloaking device, but in the boss fight he definitely teleported instantly. In later stages of the boss fight, Radec would retreat to a far spot and fire a machine gun at the player, although he could also be seen doing this quite a few times when he was closer to you. All of these elements are in PlayStation All-Stars, and they form a small part of his moveset. The cloaking and teleporting comes into play in various intros and outros, as well as one of his taunts, and the surprise grenade move also uses it, although here it's more like a dodge. But let's examine his knife and machine gun moves a little more closely, and then figure out where the rest of his arsenal came from, since surely these limited moves couldn't have inspired a whole moveset. When fighting in close quarters, Radec would use a knife to try and stab you in the back. Knives were generally a common weapon in the Killzone games. In the first game, the knife was very much a stealth weapon that could be used while sneaking up on enemies, while in later games it was just a melee move, although there were still times where it could be used for a stealth weapon. It was a really effective melee move, mind, since the knife did cause a lot of damage, sometimes being a one-hit KO. But the Killzone games provided another melee option in the form of gun butt. No matter what weapon you were carrying, it was possible to perform a quick whack with your gun designed to knock enemies back if they got too close. These are the basis for some of Radec's melee moves in PlayStation All-Stars. Radec, just like in his boss fight, would wield a knife that he uses for an upward swipe. The gun butt appears in his gun boot move, where Radec will kick an opponent and then perform a gun butt, and his final melee option, the double kick, appears to be an original move not taken from Killzone. Radec also made use of a machine gun in the final boss battle. At times he would shoot it in close quarters, and then he would retreat and use it from a distance as his health got lower. The model of machine gun was the STA-3 light machine gun, which was also usable by the player in Killzone 2. Significantly more powerful than the standard assault rifles, the STA-3 machine gun had good range and did a lot of damage very quickly. It mostly appeared towards the second half of the game as enemies started to get tougher and more numerous, so a weapon like this came in handy. Radec also uses one of these in PlayStation All-Stars where he fires a quick burst from the machine gun before reloading. Pretty effective at keeping opponents off him since it's quick and gains a decent amount of AP. In Killzone 2, Radec carried a standard pistol around with him constantly, so it seems sensible that he'd get one in PlayStation All-Stars. However, the pistol he has is a shotgun pistol, not the basic handgun that he carried in the original game. The shotgun pistol was a weapon assigned to various Helghast troops and was also briefly usable by the player in Killzone 3. This was a powerful short-range weapon that fired a powerful burst shot. It appears as part of two moves in Radec's arsenal. On the ground, Radec will knife the opponent before blasting them away with the pistol, while in the air, he will merely fire the pistol ahead of him. Shotgun pistols are one thing, but what about actual shotguns? Killzone had you covered there too, inevitably. In fact, the standard LS-13 shotgun appeared across the series and worked exactly as you'd expect a shotgun to work. It fired a burst shot that was powerful at close range but fairly weak at a distance. It's a shotgun, what more can you say? Radec also uses the LS-13 in PlayStation All-Stars, although here he will merely fire it straight upwards as an anti-air move, unlike other shotgun-carrying characters. So I mentioned that Radec's surprise grenade move features his cloaking, but let's talk about the other aspect of that, shall we? Specifically, the grenade part. As with many other FPS games, Killzone gave the ability to throw grenades. These were available pretty much constantly and occupied their own slot on the ammo counter and their own button on the controller. Grenade throwing was often fairly slow and left you open to attack in the process, but was capable at drawing out enemies out of cover, or just simply blowing them up. Radec drops a grenade in his surprise grenade move as he cloaks and ducks away, leaving a grenade behind him, which can lead to surprised opponents getting it blown up in their face. That said, just like grenade throwing in the original games, it's pretty slow to explode. Later in Killzone 2, you could pick up the M327 grenade launcher, which sped up the process of grenade throwing by allowing you to shoot grenades at enemies. The grenades operated very similarly, albeit now that they could be sent out further and faster than simply throwing them. The grenade launcher was a little difficult to aim at times, however, and it took some calculation to figure out exactly where the grenades were going to land. Radec carries a grenade launcher in PlayStation All-Stars. Here he will fire grenades at the floor, allowing them to bounce along towards his opponents. These also take a little while to explode, so it's not the most effective move in the world. Later still in Killzone 2, the player can pick up a new type of grenade. Using a mineral found on the planet Helghan called Petrosite, the Helghast developed the TRX Teslite grenade. When thrown, this wouldn't just explode, it would also generate a small pocket of loose electric energy, which would shock anyone in the vicinity. It had a slightly wider blast radius than the normal grenades thanks to this, and proved fairly effective. The Teslite grenade became part of Radec's moveset in PlayStation All-Stars, but here its use is just a little more limited. In this case, Radec will throw one into the air where it will detonate just ahead of him, creating a pocket of electricity that blocks opponents attacking him from head-on in the air, allowing him to push them away. Petrosite was used for another purpose too. Around the same time you found the Teslite grenades in Killzone 2, you could pick up the VC5 arc rifle, which appeared to be an experimental weapon that could fire an arc of electricity, shocking any enemy that came near you. The best part was, for the brief time you used it, it had unlimited ammo since it recharged instead of being needed to reload it, which means you'll barely need to use anything else for much of the level. Radec also gains the arc rifle in PlayStation All-Stars, and it works similarly to the Teslite grenade, as it creates a barrier to block incoming aerial opponents. This time the barrier is a long thin line instead of the pocket of energy, but otherwise it's much the same. Back to typical FPS weapons, what kind of FPS would Killzone be if it didn't have a sniper rifle? The VC-32 was a deadly accurate weapon, effective at long range, but suffered a little when up against closer opponents. It had an adjustable zoom scope that allowed you to hit far off enemies better. In other words, it was the typical sniper rifle. Not much else to say here, really. Radec makes use of the sniper rifle in PlayStation All-Stars. It's an infamous move that travels across the screen and comes out relatively quickly. Of course, it tends to work best at long range, which makes sense because it's a sniper rifle. Occasionally in Killzone you can encounter flamethrowers, which were not very good things to be hit by, but were pretty nice things to use. As you'd expect, the VC-1 flamethrower was a deadly weapon that could set fire to your enemies and cause a lot of death very quickly. The only real issue was that you had to get in close for the flames to be particularly effective. Radec gets the VC-1 in PlayStation All-Stars, where it offers up a short-range move that generates a lot of gradual AP as opponents are hit by its flames. One fancy futuristic weapon that made an appearance somewhere around the middle of Killzone 2 was the bolt gun. This was essentially an industrial tool used for riveting and other such things, but a weaponized version also existed. This weapon would fire a heavy bolt towards an enemy, which would pierce through their armor and stab them, and usually send them flying backwards from the force. Quite often you could also pin enemies to walls this way. Basically, this was pretty effective at removing enemies from your side quickly. The bolts were also explosive, which meant that even missing your shot could cause kills. The bot would stick to a wall and explode after a period of time, catching at anyone in the immediate vicinity. Radec's bolt gun in PlayStation All-Stars works off the latter principle. Firing this at an opponent will cause the bolt to stick to them for a period of time before eventually exploding and knocking them back, giving Radec AP in the process. Useful for catching people out. And so with that, let's recap what we've seen so far before we move on to the supers.
Level 1!
While Radec made his appearance in Killzone 2, it appears that we need to look at Killzone 3, released a couple of years later, in order to find out where his supers came from. About halfway through Killzone 3, the ISA forces found themselves on an icy island on Helghan, battling the odds at a Hellgas weapons factory. When confronted with numerous heavy guns and tanks, the logical solution was to turn the tide and use a powerful weapon on them. This weapon was the WASP launcher. No, it wasn't a gun that shot wasps, instead it was a multi-shot homing rocket launcher. With this weapon you simply locked onto your enemies, waited for the reticle to beep, and then pulled the trigger. This sent a salvo of missiles towards your target, which often took care of them pretty quickly. Despite it being from a game that Radec didn't appear in, the WASP launcher is his level 1 super in PlayStation All-Stars. Radec will pull out a WASP, allowing the player to aim it at opponents. However, in the interests of fairness, its homing ability isn't quite as good as its original counterpart, and could be dodged a little easier.
Level 2!
Later in Killzone 3, you could get your hands on a very powerful prototype weapon called the Arc Cannon. Similar to the Arc Rifle, this weapon used petrocite as its primary source of ammunition. However, the petrocite used in the Arc Cannon was a heavily irradiated green form of the mineral. Because of this, it was even more powerful. Let's not beat around the bush here. The Arc Cannon literally tore enemies apart. Firing a burst of this weapon would cause its unfortunate victim to explode and vaporize, never to be seen again. Naturally, your use of this weapon was limited because it was pretty much a game breaker due to its sheer power. So it seems obvious that it would become a super for Radec in PlayStation All-Stars, again despite not being from the same game. Radec will fire the Arc Cannon forward, sending a blast of irradiated petrocite in a line across the whole stage, creating a deadly wave for opponents to avoid or be vaporized by.
Level 3!
Finally, another prototype from Killzone 3 was more than just a weapon, it was also a form of transport. After infiltrating the Arctic bases of the Hellgas, the ISA found themselves up against Hellgas with jetpacks. Guess what? The player could then briefly use these jetpacks too, allowing you the ability to fly about and gain an aerial advantage on your enemies.
You said it yourself. If we're gonna save Norval, we're gonna have to take out those AA guns.
No, you're out of your mind. You can't fly that thing, it's suicide.
Rico, look! I fly in low. I go under their fire. I can take them out with some charges.
All right, I think you're crazy.
It also came equipped with its own built-in heavy machine gun which had unlimited ammo, meaning you could hop around and glide above enemies and rain death down on their heads without a care in the world. For his level 3 super, Radec straps one of these jetpacks to his back and jets off the stage to a suitable distance, and then begins firing the built-in machine gun at fighters still on the stage, controlled in a first-person view that recalls the view from the jetpack in the original game.
Security identified a breach of the main gate.
Why didn't 2nd Platoon? I'll deal with these two myself. Didn't I kill all of you yet? Cut them off. Break those two up! Don't let them support each other!
Expect no mercy.
And that's Radec. I'll see you next time with one of the final stage videos of the series. Stay tuned.